angry mob attacked a car trying to bring food and medical supplies to protesters in Tahrir Square. What sets this apart is the car's driver and owner is one of the leading voices of the Egyptian uprising because of his Twitter page. Until yesterday, he was known only by the derogatory moniker Sandmonkey. But now, for the first time, because of the assault, he's going public with his real name.
All right, my name is Mahmoud Salem, and I write the blog Sandmonkey. We want to be able to elect our leaders. I have no problems with Ansar Suleiman. I just want to be able to elect him. He can run like everybody else, and then we can elect him. Other than this, no.
Welcome to episode 18 of TahrirPodcast. My guest today is Mahmoud Salem, known online as Sandmonkey. Salem is an award-winning blogger and is known for occasionally toppling governments. In 2011, he ran for parliament, and in 2013, he was put on Ansar Al Sharia death list. So it didn't go that well, apparently. Welcome, Sam.
Hi, yes. This is the only good thing about June 30th, I think. It put me like the list that I was in was important before June 30th. After June 30th, but في the entire Egyptian government قبلية. So I'm glad. the one silver lining.
Right, so that's cool. We'll get into that.
Thank you for having me on your podcast. It's lovely being part of this. And yeah.
Glad to have you. So we'll get through that shortly. But first, let's start to talk about the pre-2011 period. Amid the U.S. invasion of Iraq and how that shaped maybe like the point leading up to 2011, and you being in the center of that. So can you speak more on that?
Okay, so let's go back to 2004. And the end of 2004, in 2004, blogging started happening. And there is a lot of talk about how blogging as a thing was actually fueled very much by the Iraq war. That fueled the rise of blogging because that was before social media to begin with. Facebook came out 2004, okay, in some universities in America, 2003, 2004, and it did not reach Egypt till 2006, for example. Okay, Twitter only launched in 2007. So for the longest time, early onset activism, everything had to do with the bloggers and the so-called blogosphere at the time, right? So that's when I ventured into that game just by being a person who created a blog to vent, to basically, it was to vent some anger at some inconsistencies and illogical things that I've been seeing, and at the same time, providing contrarian points of views for discussions. What if Americans didn't go to Iraq for oil, for example? What if they're actually honest about the idea that maybe if we can manage to push it in Iraq with all of its warring factions, questions like this. But it was also a time in which, let's just say that the name of the blog did not age well, even though the sentiment behind it, I believe is still the same. And the idea was that the name itself, Sandmonkey, is, I went to school in America during 9/11. So I went through 9/11 in the States, in Boston, SSM. So that's the time in which I started getting acquainted with all kinds of names for people from the Middle East and Arabs that are derogatory names. And of all of them are funny, in different weird ways. But the funniest for me were two of them. One of them was Hasn't Been Laden. And the other one was Sandmonkey. Because basically it has this funny image of this little monkey jumping up in the sand and throwing shit at everyone, basically. And it also made white people very uncomfortable. So that was basically kind of the idea, but it was just not them, it was everyone. So when people accuse me of being part of a Zionist conspiracy, or a US backed whatever, or a secular whatever, I'd be sure, yes, I'm also part of that fucking conspiracy and this conspiracy and this and that. And it was fun because there was nothing at the time. And it wasn't something that I ever envisioned to be big or known or whatever. It was just basically, I had just, I came back on the blowing up of a hotel that I was, around that day. and it was in Taba, and you come back and everybody is simultaneously happy that, you know, Israelis got killed, at the same time blaming the Israelis for the bombing, you know. And that's when things started being like, wait, what? Hold on. What? And you start noticing that there are conspiracies that have taken hold, you know, that nobody ever, like, you know, bothers with. Like, and it was at a time in which the world was demanding a dialogue, kind of, to understand what's going on with Arabs, you know, what's going on with the Middle East, what's going on, whatever, you know, and it became really hard to explain to them this. So, as I used to tell, like, people at the time, if you want to understand the Arab mind, there are 3 statements that have to coexist in your brain, without contradiction. Okay, the first one, the Holocaust never happened. Okay. The second one, Hitler is good for killing the Jews, for burning the Jews alive, but the Holocaust never happened. And whoever is running Israel is as bad as Hitler, even though Hitler is good for killing the Jews, even though the Holocaust never happened. Okay? All right? The moment you can have all those statements in one brain to coexist peacefully, if you can understand that kind of logic, then you will get what the hell is going on here, right? And that was the thing. There is, like, the idea of parallel universes, that, you know, there is whatever is happening outside, whatever is happening in our countries, because at the time it was only state media. يعني at the time you're talking that مثلا الدستور or like المصري اليوم, all of those things came out 2005, you know, and 2006. Like, it was all very new experiments, you know, when it came to journalism, when it came to opposition journalism. And they were protected by the intelligence services in order to, like, because at that time it was the police, not the military, who were in control of, like, the national media. Since 1995, it was Amn al-Dawla, not, you know, Amn al-Qawmi, or, like, you know, national security versus whatever, like, you know, state security. So very different world. All right, people believed anything. People believed whatever the media told them to believe. Social media, alternative source, and all of that stuff only came after 2011. And social media instruments suddenly became things that we started using for different reasons. Yani, before Facebook, all the events happened as something would announce all over the blogs. Or it would happen, for example, something on the aggregator of Ala Fattah. That was his claim to fame at the time. He had the aggregated the blogs of the blogosphere. And me and him and Ahmed Negi and Amr Izzat and Ahmed Gharbiya and, like, so many are, like, you know, from that first generation. You know, so many of the names that you end up finding out later or, like, hearing about later were all from those 30 people that started having those open conversations, you know, at a time in which nobody else was having them in Egypt. When Mubarak era was okay with the idea of leaving the internet as the outlet. And that's how we started doing things. That's how we did the first Free Ala campaign, for example. It was all on blogs, right? And then Facebook came, and suddenly we realized that we can do events on Facebook. So we started using Facebook for events, such as protests and stuff like that. And then came Twitter. And Twitter at the time was all SMS based. So it was very useful for us in terms of if someone is about to get kidnapped by the state, so we can find out where they are immediately. And I would get, like, news, like, I remember the day Malik Mustafa, for example, was about to get kidnapped, and, like, he sent a tweet, and I was the first person downtown to manage to, like, you know the name of the car, whatever. We used to run after our friends when they get arrested, pick them up from, like, wherever. Those years between 2005 and 2010, for example, saw a lot of action, but it was all very much the same group, you know, and the same community. And it's weird for me personally, because it's basically a bunch of activists on a bunch of writers, you know, and their friends. And then suddenly, and all they want is just basically, like, just freedom of expression, like, you know, or, like, you know, whatever, like, you know, and the next thing you know, the government, the Egyptian government, makes you its enemy, you know, and goes after every single one of them for the next 10 years. You know, bunch of writers. You understand, like, right? So yeah, so that's basically that. So it was a very it's an interesting time to have experienced, because many of the things that happened after the revolution is very much explainable by that era from before, you know, and between even the specific parties and who did what and why, for example, people from the left joined forces with the Muslim, like the history of the alliance between the socialist revolutionaries of Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood, or how they justified it mentally, right? The history of why liberals were always considered to be the sellouts, and why you discover later on that actually no, most of the Egyptian liberal elite, you know, deserve something other than representation or presence or influence, because they are horrific people, you know, who are racist and self-hating في حاجات كتيرة جدا, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you meet those, and then the left is not much better, like, you know what I'm saying? So it's a very different world in which a lot of the people who were in it were the kids of the 70s generations, okay, activists who had failed, right? Who their kids grew up with their parents' trauma, and then the kids, and that did not help when the turn came, because a lot of the time you defer to them and they were not the best people to be deferred to, right? Suddenly, like, you know what I'm saying? So it's interesting. It was an interesting time in which slowly but surely the history of activism, like at one moment, the moment the Khaled Said group started happening, that's the moment when it was out of our hands, when it's no longer part of what we were doing, right?
When it got out of the blogosphere, you mean?
Yes. So the first thing, okay, so you had 6 April, for example. Now the 6th of April protests, they were not called 6th of April movement at the time, it was called the Facebook Youth. And at the time, there were a bunch of protests happening in Suez and Mahalla that they decided to hold on that same day because it was getting some, like, you know, media coverage between Ahmed and Salah Fattah, right? And like it went and ended up getting 100,000 members, whatever. So they went and arrested those two. And nothing really happened. It was supposed to be the day of, like, you know, civil disobedience, whatever. Nothing really happened in Cairo. And at the same time, those leftist activists started having those protests in, like, you know, in Suez and in Mahalla, whatever, and burned the things of like Hosni Mubarak's, like, you know, pictures. And everybody started blaming, like they went and arrested Ahmed, thinking that they're the ones behind it. All right. And because of that, 6th of April ended up becoming the Egyptian Day of Anger at the time. And because of this, they changed the name to 6th of April group, for example, and that's how that started. Okay, yani it's like that. So you end up with, after 6th of April, which did nothing, you end up with the group that started Kulina Khalid Said, right? And the kind of tactics that they were using, which is like, you know, small protests and to disperse and to come back, and al-inhaq, basically how to tire them down. And that was throughout 2010. And that helped greatly in what happened in 2011. But that's how that went ahead. And before then, you end up with three things that happened in 2010 that I think are very important. The first one was the return of Paradise. The second one was the Egyptian hash crisis, if I remember correctly. And actually Khalid Said, right? And the truth of the matter is the people who are behind Khalid Said actually met at the Paradise conference. Like at the idea of the Paradise, like, you know, campaign. So that's how that all connected, right? But yeah, so at the time Paradise came back and people of Egypt started having, and I think 2010 was basically a time in which the Egyptian ambition grew for a better life. People appreciated Mubarak's existence and what he has created in a way, but they wanted more, you know. And I think that was the thing that happened in 2011, basically, that allowed it, like, you know, is that, you know, it was a time of greater ambitions than what the reality allowed. And I think that happened because my generation, or our generation that came on the internet, started realizing that life moves on outside of Egypt. Because for the longest time, time did not move. We were the same thing. for like 20, 30 years. It was the same star, the same, like, until today. Yani, look at Amr Diab. You know, look at like Yusra. Like, it's sad. They will not give up. It's an entire generation that refuses to fucking give up, you know?
Mm.
And it's fine. They created the country. Everything that happened in the country happened during Mubarak's age, which we cannot also deny. It was a time of peace and stability. But like, stability, if you don't use it to build something for the future, becomes stagnation. A country is very different when it's, when you're dealing with younger people who want to build new things, and you're dealing with older people who just want to keep things as they are and not have any problems with it, right? And that was the issue at the time. Little did we know, right? That like, that the Egyptian state like was dealing with the last remnants of a generation. That Mubarak belonged to a generation of the pre-52, which is a very different upbringing than the one you have afterwards. Mubarak and Suzanne both were married to British citizens. Mubarak, and Sadat, both were married to British citizens. Gamal Mubarak has a British nationality. And it was fine. If you're married to a foreigner now, you can get into the military, but you could be the president of Egypt. It's normal. Now like it's normal to marry your cousin if you're the president of Egypt, because both our last two presidents have married their cousins. It's different ages. The revolution happened for a reason, so we can all marry our cousins. So anyway, I'm sorry, inappropriate. But that's basically like the pre-2011 period. As far as my role in this kind of thing was, I was a blogger, and then when terrorist attacks happened in 2005, I wanted to do an anti-terrorism protest. And being that my mom at the time was a member of parliament with Hosni Mubarak, I tried to go through the official channels, only to have, after I've sent the SMSs or whatever, to find the thing that I'm being threatened of arrest if it fucking goes through. And that's when I was just like, they're like afraid that it's an anti-terrorism protest, but it might turn into an anti-Mubarak protest. I'm like, we're protesting terrorism. What are you saying about Mubarak? What are you doing? So it ended up happening regardless, right? But so that was the time in which like I decided that we're too dumb to like rule us.
And where did it take place?
That's when I joined the protest movement, basically, as well as
what did that anti-terrorism protest take place?
It was in July.
No, where?
2005. We were supposed to meet on the Kubri.
Asr Nil?
6 October.
Oh.
Yeah, no, the idea is to like, do it outside of like, it was a spontaneous protest level, and then they said, no, we need to do it elsewhere. So when I went and got the permit, I was going to do it at Al-Azhar Park. Because at the time, there was a lot of pressure regarding Islam and terrorism and whether Islam condones terrorism, whatever. So the idea of an anti-terrorism protest and the word Azhar in the same word or sentence, at the time, I knew it was going to be media gold. And it was, and it worked. But that was the moment in which I started like going to the protest against Mubarak and like for democracy and stuff like that. With the idea, with the notion, with the complete understanding that, I could end up like Iran, right? But that's basically what we were saying. We were saying, let's give everyone a chance to make their own decisions. And as we have seen, people have chosen not to make new choices anymore. And so giving them the choice, they chose not to make choices. So now I have no questions. Like, I don't try to like push for anything anymore or whatever. That question I had, in which I gave up my family privilege for, was whether or not like, dictatorship, is something that people actually want, if they really like, or if they actually want democracy and freedom. And the truth of the matter is they don't. And it's not that they don't because they don't. It's like you live 2,000 years after occupation, under foreign occupation that doesn't end. And prior to that, 3,000 years of the original God King Pharaonic rule, right? And after those 5,000 years of just pure oppression, Suddenly you're like, sure, you're in charge. So the military comes in and they take over. And what can they do except treat you as an occupying force as well? Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's the same idea. People are so used to the idea that they're not part of the power decision-making process that they literally like either went with the direction that they thought would protect them in the afterlife and voted for the Muslim Brotherhood, or they went for the direction that would prevent them from taking any more choices and went with the military. And that was the moment in which I was like, okay, guys, thank you very much. I appreciate everything. I'm out. But the truth of the matter is we were children, right? We were kids. I was 29 in 2011. Everybody else was like younger than me, right? And me and Mustafa Nagar are the same age now, you know? So like you end up being responsible on the forefront of something, mainly because you're one of the people willing to talk about it at a time that was, in retrospect, a lot more freer than what we are experiencing right now, you know? So it's a very different world. And it's a very different political landscape. You had some very strange fringe parties at the time. I remember there was a party called Masr al-Umm, and their thing was, we're gonna have to teach Coptic language in schools, and you know, the sons and daughters of Kemt, and like, you know, that stuff. Yeah. You know, the Islamic invasion and like, you know, Egypt, which is like cool, well, whatever, like, you know, sure, we're pharaohs, why not? Like those are the kind of players that were there. So like after 2011, when 2011 happened, you know, it's a very different situation. But the truth of the matter is, like, if you ask any single one of us, like the Jan 25, nobody knew what was going on. We were making fun of it before going down that day. We thought it was going to be a joke. But you were the people who went to protest for solid 6 years, despite everything that has happened, you know, so you might as well go down. And that was basically like, you know, let's go down and play with the police, basically. And I do have to say it was a fun day. You know, it pisses me off in retrospect because I remember that day, all I wanted was Habib al-Adli removed, the Minister of Police. But, you know.
Talking about the 25th of January, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And before we started recording, you were telling me about your Habib al-Adli theory of destabilizing and basically fucking the whole world order. So how about you elaborate on that?
Oh God. Oh, okay. Is that your transition? Okay. Great transition. No, it's my pet peeve. Like, okay, like so if you are being a reductionist, there is a very easy line that you can connect whatever happened in Jan 25 to like the world that we're in today, right? You start with Jan 25, like you start with Tunisia, right? And the situation with Tunisia led to the biggest case of penis envy in Egypt, because how could Tunisia do this and we cannot, and our penis is bigger and thus we must do this, right? You know, and because of what happened in Egypt, it led to protests in a lot of other countries, such as Libya, Syria, you know, all the other places. Now, most of those countries are gone. As we know them, they're like destroyed, right? And because of their destruction, like something like ISIS rose up. And because of ISIS, we end up with a Syrian refugee crisis. And because of Syrian refugee crisis, we end up with the European crisis, we end up with Brexit, and we ended up with the rise of the far right, and we ended up with Donald Trump, you know, in America. And like, so while all of this is happening, and also the arrest of Mubarak, the death of Mubarak, the all the events that happened back in June 30th, Rabah, whatever, even the arrest of Mohammed Morsi and death of Mohammed Morsi, and throughout it all, like Habib al-Adli, like spent maybe 3 years in prison, you know, and during which he was treated like a king, because he was treated by the people he hired as the Ministry of Interior, and none of the cases really like affected him. And now he has been released, and he is apparently a fugitive And despite the fact that, like, you know, everybody knows that he lives in his villa in 6 October, and the police likes to go there, have tea with him, and then, you know, not find him. And that happens occasionally. And so that man is free, right? Like, we were going to remove Habib al-Adli. If Habib al-Adli, and like prevent Donald Mubarak from like taking over power. And at that time, Omar Suleiman was an acceptable solution. So like on Jan 24 had like Hosni Mubarak announced that Omar Suleiman is his VP, and the removal of Habib al-Adli replaced him by anyone else. Jan 25 would not have happened, right? It was after Jan 25 and the face-off with the Adli police, and then the face-off with the Megan on Jan 28, and their failure to like bring us down is the reason why we went the route of bring down Mubarak. And not, you know, that's when we started to remove Mubarak and not al-Adli. And suddenly Mubarak became, you know, important. And suddenly, like, you know, and that's how it went. Like, I still remember we went down for al-Adli. And while the whole world went into hell and 4 countries stopped existing, and all of this death and destruction happened, this man, you know, free and happy. And like, if you ask me, why did if Jan 25 was a failure, I'm like, well, Habib al-Adli. That's the proof. Anything else is debatable. But like, when it comes to Habib al-Adli, no one got him. No one. He won. He did whatever he wanted. The world went to hell, and he never suffered for it. That bastard. Yes. So yes. Go on. Ask me something.
All right. So in 2013, you were put on the Ansar Al Sharia death list.
But before that, let's talk
There
about
was a
the
reason
problem.
for this.
Yeah,
So
we definitely-
2011. I find myself suddenly a known entity, because the police, like, there was a time in which they actually wanted to kill me and destroyed my car, and like, I had to like come public and like, you know, showcase my face and everything and my identity, which honestly speaking, I never really wanted to, because none of my parents really knew of my activism and it was too much of a headache. But here we are. So suddenly you're dealing with this new landscape, and in this new landscape, somehow you are one of the very known ones, mainly because you're also not really dealing with the local media, always dealing with the international media as a choice. Like, I knew that I did not want to be, you know, الشاب السيسي لو قال رئيس, يعني, that on television. Like, that was that was not my goal. So the idea was to do something different. And at the time, you know, I spoke with many people in the different like parties. At the time the parties were being like created, and people need to know what kind of political landscape we're dealing with. You know, you suddenly have something like the Social Democrat Party being created, supposedly representing this new left, like, right, a more acceptable center left. You know, suddenly you have something as the Free Egyptian Party, which is a reaction of Naguib, and like, you know, for like Coptic political leadership at a time in which Tamaz and Barahud were like, you know, gearing up, in his opinion. You know, you have Al-Adl, which was Mustafa al-Naggar and Hisham al-Khizndar at the same time. You know, Citadel Capital and ex-Ikhwan, you know, and supposedly connected to the Baradei campaign in weird ways, but not really, and nobody knew what they were really like positioned. You know, there's a whole bunch of them that like came out, some of them Muhafzin, whatever, like, you know, so many, like, you know, at the time, and not to mention the old ones. Yad al-Wafd, Wal-Ghad, and the return of Ayman Noor, and all of that fun stuff. So at the time, you wanted to see what kind of political landscape you're dealing with. At the same time, you are very afraid of that Islamic juggernaut that you might have been unleashed. So that ends up becoming, you know, as a student of the political whatever, you understand that campaigns are run by money. And you also know that the money is not going to be donated by anyone, so you have to actually go to the people with the money, and that's basically no bigger money than Nagi. So I was part of the Politburo and the people who, you know, helped establish the party, basically, at the time. And
the Free Egyptians Party,
the Free Egyptians
Muslims
Party. Yes. And I brought in, at the time, my friend from DC. It was Ramia'u, I don't know if you've interviewed him yet, the Tahrir Institute.
Not
All of this came from like, that party at the time. And the people who brought me in were Karim and Khalid Bashara. For example, like the whole thing was very much connected. Khalid, Allah yarhamu now,
No.
So when you started it, you started seeing a whole bunch of people that you've only known of. It was Naguib, and then there is Ghabour, who his son, but you never met him. And Salmawi, and I don't know, like a whole bunch of like some of the technically best people in Egypt, right? The richest, the most successful, the whatever, elites. But what does that mean? What does it mean to be an Egyptian elite? Does it mean you're smarter than everybody else, or you were just fortunate? You came at the right time. You were just lucky. Like, are you the best people to run a political campaign? If your ideas of what's happening in the street is whatever your friends, in the croquet of Heliopolis Club or Gezira Club tell you are their concerns. What do you know about Egypt? All right, what do you know about Egyptians? How many places have you visited? Okay, what kind of policies do you want? What kind of, and you end up with people who want to like recreate the NDP, like they just want to be the party for everyone. And you try to explain to them there's no such thing as the party for everyone. That this is a different thing. And it was a time in which, like, you have an influence such as Naguib, like, who is, mind you, the oldest 23-year-old I've ever met in my life, and he wants things in a specific way, right? And then you have someone like Ghabour, very different energy, just came out of prison, very different, And then you have someone like, the nephew of Omar Suleiman, Raghi Suleiman, in the mix. And then you have someone like Hani Sarayuddin, in the mix. And you have someone like Ahmed Saeed in the mix. And then you have all of those people who like might be like, the COO of Orascom Construction, right? But while they would be fantastic operators of a construction operation, they might not be the best people to handle the operations of a party, because you're working on the intangible, right? You're trying to sell ideas. How do you measure it? How do you do it? Like, and at the same time, they were very afraid of getting international help or assistance or training, because they're afraid of being branded as an American trained or American backed or Western backed. So you were dealing with people who all the time were very much afraid, but at the same time were very desperate, to stop something. And that creates an environment of just like chaos and abuse and, fun stuff, if you will. Or by fun, I mean horrifying, of course. But like, because suddenly you have the situation in which Naguib is trying to get the people to join his party, and you're trying to get Hamzawi to join your party. And Hamzawi is, wants to make his own party. Or like, but he wants the money from Naguib. Or they want like social democrats. So like, we're going to create the, the Egyptian bloc. All right. So like people start blackmailing people with like, we're going to put this guy against you. Like, the person who's negotiating with one of our guys who's supposed to be like, impartial, but he's running. Like, they have a stronger candidate. So like, they basically got him to concede most of the Upper Egypt candidates, right? Would have won a lot harder if it was actually Naguib's, like, stamp approval on the situation, mainly because they were afraid, he was afraid of like, having this guy run against him on his seat. And this is what you're dealing with. You're dealing with opportunism happening back and forth. And of all of the parties, basically, if you're asking me to like rate, like the performance of the different parties, I would tell you that the best party was Hizb Noor, had the best political operators, right? And the party that basically showcased its ethical, complete bankruptcy is the Social Democrats.
And why do you think that is the case in both the Social Democrats and the Salafis?
Well, and the Salafis, most of their operators were basically like, until they left, basically, you're dealing with a very different generation. But if you look at their political, like, moves and ambitions and how they operated, perfectly. They did it very well. They were very representative, had the best speaking people, They were very worldly for Salafis, you know, not talking about the people in the parliament. That's a different story. Talking about the people you would see on television, the party leadership, right? So you have that. And then you have Social Democrats who basically, like, you know, were thinking that they're the smartest, right? Like, you know, so they try with the Free Egyptians Party. The Free Egyptians Party, like, you know, give them breath, give them resources. They tried to screw them over the moment right after by like joining the Muslim Brotherhood in a conference, you know, during the, like, you know, the distribution of like seats or whatever, like stuff like that. Instead of like sitting down negotiating as a group, they only do what's best for them. And that ended up with them being the transitional government of Sisi's coup. Because if you don't remember, the first prime minister, you know, under in Adli Mansour's era was Hassan Biblawi. And you had all of the big names of the Social Democrats Party being part of that government as the people who rubber stamped the coup itself. They did not quit after Rabah. They did not, they continued, you know? So yes, so that was the thing. And Free Egyptians basically like was there as to spend some money. It was the wallet.
And
yeah, and before that we were speaking, you had like a really like interesting argument about Egypt's first founding elections, the first parliamentary
post Mubarak election.
Yes, okay. That my conspiracy theories. Okay. No, I'll tell you basically because you ended up, you know, being part of like so many different parts of the elections. All right. And different elections, different. We voted a lot during those 2 years. Right. And the thing is that you start realizing very quickly is that how do you, in order to protect your votes, you need to understand how votes are stolen, right? So there is that. And when you start looking at measures in order to protect the votes, suddenly you're faced with something as simple as how elections are held in Egypt. Now, the way elections are held in Egypt, it's under the purview, you get your IDs from the Ministry of Interior, which is the police. You also get the voter rollouts, you know, from the Ministry of Interior, which is the police. So in order for you to basically steal any seat, all you have to do as the government is publish different voter rollouts for the different rooms for the same person who can vote multiple times, just as long as they have different IDs. And this is something they found out during the parliamentary elections. It was a WAFT candidate who ended up having a guy come up to him with 4 different IDs for his same name, but with different ID numbers. All of them are legitimate. He was going to ask them which are you supposed to like vote for each, like, you know, ID. And that's when they did, like, you know, he did basically, he collected, and the way they give you the voter rollout as a candidate, they give them to you in a PDF file, an image PDF file. So at the time you had to, like, you know, if you wanted to like run any kind of analysis, you needed to like enter everything manually. And that's what that candidate did. You know, he went and got all of the voter rolls from all of the districts that Al Wafd was running in. And like he put all of it and ran queries, and he stipulated about 9 million votes that were added.
And what did he do once he found out this?
Oh, he filed a lawsuit. He filed a lawsuit and everything.
And how did that end up?
I have no idea how it ended, but it's a thing. It's there, and he showed the proof of it. You know, the information is there, and people wrote about it, and everybody ignored it. That, like, you know, remember the bodies that they found in the police station in Alexandria? During the revolution 2011, when they attacked Amn al-Dawla in Alexandria and they found like 2 bodies buried in the basement. That happened, okay? In one of the days, Alexandria stormed Amn al-Dawla in Alexandria, and they found 2 bodies in the basement, and we never heard about them again. Those things people forget about. But what becomes interesting is the idea that the national voters in 2011 were 40 million. And the way you voted at the time, you were allowed to vote with your national ID. So there's no special registration you had to do. You had to do anything. You just go with your national ID and do it. And in 2012, the eligible voters in Egypt were suddenly 52. So I don't know how that happened. I don't know how you increased 12 million voters over one night. I thought that maybe they all just turned 18 apparently, and so that means that what we produce like 2 million every year. Apparently that year we produced 6 times our target and reached 12 million or something. I googled it, tried to like find out if that was the year Viagra came into Egypt. I tried to find any kind of logical solution to this situation, and I don't have any, you know, and that's the problem. We cannot verify if anyone won any elections. There is no way.
What about the presidential?
There is no, well, that's what I'm saying. This is no way. That's the one, the presidential. Presidential was suddenly 52 million. You know, and that's the one in which, like, you know, you end up with like, and the election and presidential elections, like, okay, do you want to know why we know the presidential elections is bullshit?
Why?
Besides that it took it a week to count, which it didn't need it, khalas, you know, but it was the fact that like the only difference between Shafiq and winning the elections was the amount of the invalidated votes. Like, it is never that mathematical. It is never that close. It is never that people who went like the 300, he lost by 300,000 votes, and like it's 300,001 that have like, you know, invalidated. No, he was told, like Shafiq was actually called in and was told that he won, and they sent to him, you know, a car to protect him, and then something happened. And then suddenly it was Morsi, and it made perfect sense at the time. Like, it was one of those conversations in which no matter how you try to explain it to other people, they wouldn't get it. But that there is no way that Shafiq, like, you know, would be allowed to win, because they wouldn't be able to remove him. And he would give no safe quarter to Tantawi. As far as Shafiq was concerned, Tantawi is a coupist. And not only is Tantawi a coupist, Tantawi is the Minister of Defense who fired him publicly on television as the Prime Minister. Okay, so there was going to be revenge. And it was going to be the kind of revenge in which no one could like negate its authority, because he is the son of the institution. He has a military background. عنده المؤخرة. You know, so
a year later you were put on the Ansar Sharia death list.
Yeah, no. I got put on the Ansar Sharia list. Why? So in June 2012, I quit the Free Egyptians Party. And I quit it after Morsi won. And the reason why I quit it was because there was a reaction inside the Politburo, not from Naguib, not from any of them, but like from others, in which, like, you know, they didn't do any of the work, they didn't do any of the alliances, they didn't do whatever. They were scared and they decided that maybe it's time to run. Okay. And I could, like, you know, and I shamed them basically, and I left. And when I left, I had gathered such experience when it came to like political campaigning and stuff like that, that, like, you know, I ended up being approached by people to join the NSF and help them with their campaigning, or like Hizb al-Dastur, first of all, the Dastur party. And that's when I went and met Al-Qadai for the, we have a contentious relationship, but it was the first time I was invited to his house.
It's on the Alexandria Cairo Desert Road, right?
Yes. It was the first time I ever met also Anissa Hassouna, her rest in peace.
Oh, yeah.
I love that lady. Like, we became friends that day because like he was saying things that were about to like make her like pass out, and I was like, "We'll be fine. It's okay." He's crazy. No, let it go. But yes, you were dealing with many, like, you know, players or whatever, like at the time. Mustafa Gindi, stuff like that. They're all jumping in under the Dastur party because it was going to be the new thing, right? But I was only interested in the form of like the moment the NSF started forming, right, in order to oppose the constitution that the Muslim Brotherhood got involved.
The NSF, you mean the National Salvation Front?
I was the person.
That's Gabat al-Inqadh, right? جبهة الإنقاذ in Arabic.
جبهة الإنقاذ.
Yeah.
جبهة الإنقاذ, yes. Right, and it was a time in which we were dealing with the constitution and stuff like that, and a lot of the people who were doing a lot of the like the Dstoor party at the time, it's one thing that it was volunteers. Everybody, like all the young kids, went to it because of Al-Baradi, and that meant you had lots of people on the ground. They just needed instructions, right? And given that this was a referendum, right, this is not an election, so you're not trying to, like, you know, get people to convince people to vote for a group. You're trying to convince them to vote against something, or, you know, or like for a person against something. So I handled negative campaigning, and that was what I did basically. Like, one of the things that I managed to do at the time was to prevent the recruitment using mosques. I gave the kids basically the things that they need to do, all of the dirty works basically.
Prevent whose recruitment? The Islamist recruitment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You basically had the referendum happening on a Friday and a Saturday. So your aim was to destroy the ability to convince people to vote, right, that Friday and the Friday before for mobilization. You need to end their mobilization through mosques. And how I did that was creating groups of 4 that would go to their mosques. And yes, and create basically like disruption. So like you have 4 people sit in very different corners of the mosque. And if the imam tries to, like, you know, push for like a candidate or whatever, you know, the first one like voices disagreement, the one in the back shouts, says that we should not do this, the one in the left like agrees, the one on the fourth says, you know, why are you getting politics involved in, like, you know, in the mosque, you know, and it will either like get people into fighting right, and that will ruin the possibility of mobilization, or it will shame the guy enough that he wouldn't be able to mobilize using the mosque. And that was basically the idea. You know, if you cannot fight, if you cannot equal, disrupt, you know. And at the time, they also asked me the question of like what to do about the Muslim Barad, and I came up with a solution, which in hindsight would have been preferred to what happened. But at the time, I came up with it and I didn't give it to them because it was just too evil.
Which
I
one?
was like, no, I'm not going to tell you. It's too evil. I'm not going to admit to this one. No,
after we stop recording.
Sure, yes, sure. No, but like, yeah, so basically you tell them this, and the idea is to cause disruption, you know. But at the time there was such chaos, right? Like suddenly, like the kids had guns. The next thing you know, they have stolen Abdullah Rushdie, I think, from a mosque in Zazi, and then went and, like, you know, did that fantastic 2-day face-off in Alexandria, you know, with the machine guns. Yeah, suddenly you had a machine gun, like, you know, standoff, you know, that happened because someone tried to mobilize in that mosque. And you're like, okay, you know, and that was the country you were living in at the time. It was land of do as you please. It was complete chaos. And that, when you're dealing with the idea of a theocracy coming in, is a time to resist. It's time to push back. And that's what we did.
Apparently.
Yes. So apparently it was successful enough, like, you know, that it garnered me a spot on the list. Apparently, like, you know, that made, like, apparently there is an author who I grew up, children books author, who I grew up like reading, called Mahmoud Salem, who apparently his daughter thought it was him. And like she contacted me when she found out it was me. She was like, you just made my grandfather very, very happy. He was wondering why he was on the list. And it was a very weird list. Like my name was so random to be placed in there. Like it was between like Naguib Sawiris, Amr Adib, and Fathi Surur. And like, you know, to think that I am vilified to this degree, you know, it just warms my heart, I think. And it was also like around the same time in which I was getting like, you know, like weekly, like, or like SMS threats on my phone, like death threats.
How do you
And
deal with them?
I used to respond by flirting. Sounds you would tell me more. Like, that sounds hard. حاجات كده. Yeah, I would never get a response.
Yeah, they're busy.
I think, I think this is my way of countering death threats. I'll just make them sexual and weird. You know, like.
That's a good strategy.
But yeah, no, and then next thing you know, Tamarrud. And Tamarrud was hilarious because, like, you know, the entirety of Tamarrud's offices were the Free Egyptians Party offices.
Hmm.
Yeah, so you knew everything about Tamarrud. You knew how many like signatures you really collected. You learned many things, like, basically, and you were involved in this interesting PR lead up that was the June 30th situation, right? But again, the aim was elections. Next thing you know, you have Baradei up there, like, you know, shaking hands and approving a coup with Sisi, and you could not fight that. What's happening, because it was everything. You were like, okay, maybe. And then, you know, what happened. And Baradei disappointed and ran away, protecting his international legacy, because let's face it, Egypt was no longer fun. I mean, you gotta remember, we had bets that Baradei was, me and Mustafa Nagar, basically, against anyone. Baradei, in 2011, Baradei was not gonna run 2012, right? And so when he did announce he was not running, right, he threw the entire chase into, like, you know, the race into chaos at the time, remember? And then he was done. And then he left the country. And then he ended up meeting Salma Hayek and Julianne Moore, who kissed him and, like, hugged him and looked at him adoringly. And he came back and he was like, let's create a Dastur party.
And can you blame him? Can you blame him, really?
Yeah, I can blame him. Okay, so basically, the amount of times in which El Baradei, like, do you know Baradei never went to Tahrir Square?
Really?
Never. There was once he was supposed to go, and, like, some scuffle happened and he ran. Not a single time. Masalan, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're dealing with someone who, since he came, like, everybody projected on him. You know, they needed a leader. Like, they just needed sheep. They're like, it was sheep in need of a shepherd. And they all projected. And the reality of it was completely different. Like, the idea that somehow El Baradei is, like, you know, cleaner than Amr Musa. They share the same office for like 15, 20 years. Both of them are the state. The only difference is one became Minister of Foreign Affairs and the other one joined international institutions. But you know what I'm saying? Like, what is the difference, really? What is truly the difference? He is just like that he was abroad and that he is cleaner because he lived in Vienna. Like, you know, I know, and those are the things you're dealing with, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Those are the keys of power. Those are the reasons why, like, suddenly, like, Hamdin Sabahi became a viable option, because, you know, the rich and the powerful were like, we have no one whose show could be secular that we know. Okay, Hamdin, fine. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was that. So, for example, Amr Musa, because Amr Musa was very gray. You cannot be both Hosni Mubarak and not Hosni Mubarak. Shafiq, at least, was not gray. Shafiq was black and white. She was like, and Shafiq going back to, like, you know, get revenge on Tantawi. Right? I got humiliated on television. I got fired on television. You know? So that's him. And, like, that's fine. I respect that. I respect Morsi. He was also not gray. He was Ikhwan, like, you know, Kharshat Ikhwan. You know, but Al Futuh and Amr Musa, like, everybody was surprised when they got, like, low numbers. I was just like, you know. So yes, so it was a fun time. I had a great time, wallahi, during those 2 years. You know, I ran for elections, I lost, and then ran elections for other campaigns, and I won them. Put my life in danger so many times, I got used to it, to the point in which, like, you know, and that's the thing, like, I think most people don't understand internationally, is that those few years, people have seen so much horror, like, you know, on daily and weekly basis, that we internalized it so much that we're no longer like really affected by it. And that is a trauma that is not going away. And it's hard to like project, like, talk about it at times in which people like Syrians exist, gone through like, far worse trauma than you are, or Libyans, or like whatever, but it is what it is. All right. Like, you are, okay. So I'll ask you a question. In your life, you're like, how old are you right now? 22?
21.
How many dead bodies have you seen?
I think maybe 3.
Including car accidents.
Yeah, I'm including that. So I think one was a couple of months ago. Like I saw him on the side of the road, like completely.
Okay.
Unrecognizable. And I think one was, I think it was around the like 2011 period, but I think it was following the revolution, and I saw like someone being carried, but I don't really remember the details. And I think that's it. But I saw some action. I saw a bomb. There was a bomb like 5 meters from where my house was. The Alexandria security chief, I lived like a couple of blocks beside him. So exactly right. I think it was in the middle, either in the middle of the revolution or following the revolution. I wanted to buy a USB flash drive. So there was like a computer shop nearby. So I was walking. So I see this, this huge mansion, it used to be like police everywhere, and back then there was nothing basically. So I thought the gates, there was no gates. So I thought I'd, check out what happened there. So I entered the mansion through the gates that no longer exist. So I see these, this empty mansion. It's basically, it was stolen and then it was burnt to the ground. And yeah, so that was very eye-opening.
Yeah, but for some reason it felt so good to see this in person.
Okay. All right.
Now I pass by.
I appreciate
pass by and see,
this story.
Now when I pass by, because I walk around a lot when I'm back home, so now every time I pass by, I've seen these fuckers. I saw this burnt to the ground 10 years ago.
It's back. So a few years ago, there was this crazy guy in مدينة الإنتاج الإعلامي in Cairo, and he was called the Egyptian Hulk.
Yeah, I know.
You remember him?
That wasn't me.
It wasn't you, no. But like, he was all dressed in green, and he went to the top of the building, and he threw like rocks at people, and like they shot him at the end, right?
Yeah.
And like, the children of trauma that we are, like, I shared it as something funny, because it was until the last minute funny, right? Like, I'm saying, until he died. But like for a good 3 minutes, it was just pure entertainment. Like, what I'm saying? And but I remember, like, someone who followed it, who was from the States, was just like, oh my God, that's horrifying. They killed him. Like, should have had a trigger warning, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, what? It's horrifying that they killed. Wait, hold on. They're like, yeah, we've never seen someone get killed, like, in point blank like this before. I was like, wait, what? So, I asked the question, like, okay, if you're a follower of mine, please let me know, like, how many dead people on average have you seen throughout your life, right? And if you're white or European or whatever, you've seen maybe once or twice dead people. If you're Egyptian, the first question is, including traffic or not traffic? Without traffic, 1 or 2, but with traffic, at least 50. Does that include the revolution? Stuff like that. So like, so it becomes kind of interesting in that regard. We don't like, and so most of those people, most of those Westerners, like maybe have gone through 1 traumatizing or 2 traumatizing events throughout their lives, right? Like, and that defines them, that becomes the story. We used to have like 3 of those every week for a good 2 years. So you normalize the horrifying, you normalize basically like, blood, and you normalize suffering. And that's why when something like, when you went, I remember like a few years ago, I saw a video of myself in Tahrir in 2011, and I was talking very convincingly about the idea that, like, of how Khalid Saeed got killed in broad daylight by the police in the street, and this is not something we would ever accept. How could someone just get killed and their life ended? And then 6 years later, you end up with things like Shaima As-Sabbar, and it's like live on television, and everybody's like, we didn't shoot it.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Rab'a, like, what I'm saying? Like, so many things have happened in terms of brutality that no longer touch us because we're beyond desensitized. Like, at this point, it is no longer a tragedy, right? Like, if someone gets killed by a state, and that is the scary part, right? Like, that is the problem. That is the thing that, like, when you take a look at, for example, the amount of like death penalties that came out, or like the amount of people that got killed in clashes, right? You know what I'm saying? Which is a lot of people, like a lot of people.
Yeah, and on that note, like looking back in the revolution, I was quite young, so most of my like exposure was through TV, and I remember the first couple of days, before 2011, you never heard of someone getting killed, and when you did, it was it was quite huge. Like, you would actually remember it and remember what happened.
But
So,
then
yeah,
what?
it was a big problem. Like, I'm saying, it was something
Exactly.
big.
But then when the revolution,
When the revolution happened, we every day 10 people killed, 20 people killed, 40 people killed. It became very normal to the point that it would, like, you wouldn't really like care enough. They just became numbers at that point.
No, this is the problem.
exactly. So you don't necessarily have to have witnessed it in person, but just
The one for Saeed
reading it.
happened, it started becoming numbers.
Yeah, that was
children.
that was the highest number, like, at that period, right?
I know, but like, that's the thing, right? Like, when you're talking about brutality, like, what are you, which area? What area? What you've had to deal with in Cairo is very different than what you had to deal with in Sinai, for example.
Yeah.
And people in North Sinai, nobody protected them. And like, that's the thing. Like, you act as if, I'm sorry, we just lost something. Yes. Like, we act as if like such things have no effect, but they do have an effect. And it's problematic. It's not good. It's not, people have not had a break. People have been living in this world of death and prison, brutality, and like arrests and economic مش عارف ايه, like, and it's like the idea that you, for example, don't remember very much the world before 2011 is problematic for me, because I am terribly sorry. It was not like, it was not like this, and the fact that like it does not lead to anything better, but something far, far worse, is weird. It's not the intention, but it is like, historically speaking, also acceptable, because that's what usually happens after revolutions. It's very rare that a revolution leads to stability afterwards. There's usually a revolution, and then there is a counter-revolution, and then there is a period of like 10, 15 years of bullshit, and then something else happens, and that we just go through the cycle, right? But at the time, it seemed like the only way out. And now it doesn't seem like it's the solution to anything.
I mean, I kind of share that same sentiment, because if you tell me, tomorrow we're organizing protests throughout the country, strikes, everything, I think that would be kind of counterintuitive, because it would basically fuck the economy, and it wouldn't really matter if you have, if you have democracy and free speech and so forth. Putting aside the fact that that's...
Putting aside the fact that the economy is fucked anyway?
No. Putting aside the fact that it's gonna take, thousands, and it's not that simple to acquire.
No, it's not even that. It's like, listen, before there was a party that you could remove. Now it's the military.
Exactly.
And that's war. That's civil war. There will be no winners.
Yeah, but I still it's like it's making a constituting a problem for me to not be able to imagine an alternative because there must be one.
So what do you think
There
is
is one, but like, okay, so like, what is the problem of the current structure? What is the difference between the state now versus the state at Mubarak stays? The parliament, for example.
are you asking me?
No, you saw my
Yeah,
podcast
yeah,
with Eric. We talked about this, how
yeah,
it was always like the big guy مش عارف ايه وكده.
yeah.
In
One
CP's
second, 1 second. Guys, check out From Cairo podcast. Great podcast, and
okay,
check it out.
nice
Yeah.
plug. Yes. Yeah. The link for my podcast, which is the only good one, is right there. Go watch it. Anyway, here, click here. But no, it's the idea of it was whoever was a strongman. So there was a structure on the ground. And people who like fought the Muslim Brotherhood in different like governorates during June 30th, whatever. It was not the military and it was not the revolutionaries. It was the NDP affiliated families. Okay, who are finally having their revenge after being called filul and like taken out of the equation for such a long time. It was they're the ones who like really went after them. It was not Shab per se, even though they are part of the Shab and therefore they are Shab. But Shab is always like given to ideas such as like the people are always like it's supposed to be some sort of spontaneous thing. And I can assure you very little of what happened during those 2 years was spontaneous. The march towards the Israeli embassy, for example, that was not spontaneous. You know, like
Is
stuff
that the
like
one
that.
when Egyptian commanders were dispatched to extract the
When we had Flagman, when we had the great moment of victory in which one man went and scaled the building and then removed the Israeli flag from the building.
Yeah, you were there?
No, I was outside of the country. I was in an actual conference and I was watching in horror.
Oh.
And then they gave him an apartment in Zazi where he came from, I think, or something. No, it was a great time. We had the guy that wanted to wrestle a lion. No, Egypt was fun, like, to be honest. Like the one thing that we showed that like if you open the country just a little bit, it has enough freaks and international presence that it could be a really fun and entertaining place to live in. Now it's just kind of I'm sorry. But yeah, no, it's yeah, fun times.
Yeah.
But no, even now, it's not about the economy. The economy is bad. Like, I don't know. Do you have any dogs or cats? Like, do you have to like do you need anything from abroad? Does any of your family have cancer treatments that they need to get, something like this?
No.
Because Egypt ran out of chemo like 6 weeks ago. I don't know if they were.
Seriously? Are you serious?
How much is the cheese right now? How much is I hear that you can get like if you find the جبنة president, it's like 75 جنيه دلوقتي, 75 fucking pounds or something for like some cheese.
I don't know. I don't eat president. Fuck
You don't
president.
eat cheese? Okay. Okay. No. It's because of this current devaluation that I understood the great economic metric of kilo paneer. يعني فاهم, I did not know.
Yeah, I saw that.
You know, do the calculations, but apparently it is. So yes.
So you, in your efforts of, you know, when you were campaigning for the Free Egyptians Party, you campaigned in both in Suez and in Sinai. So how was that experience like, and what are some of the most notable differences you've noticed in both?
All right. So basically, I after losing so I had this plan for my own election campaign to have a blitzkrieg towards the last week, and I planned everything for that reason. And within the last week, Mahmoud happened, you know, and Mahmoud happened, and Malik ended up like losing his eye. I ended up freezing my campaign, and publicly, which led to everybody else freezing their campaigns, which ended up causing problems, you know. So I ended up losing, and they ended up blaming me for it. So that's when I realized also that like you can either be the candidate or the manager. And I was a far better manager than a candidate, you know. So that's when I went to the route of, okay, let me manage one of the campaigns. And at the time, we ended up having this situation in Suez that was supposedly going well. And I was asked to go and like monitor it, you know, at the time. And that was ended up being one of the most psychotic experiences of my life. And I think it's it's really funny because after I came back from it, like what was happening during I came back from it, like I remember I met with my father, and my father is very much like Hizb Kanaba, like he is very much status quo person, like, you know. And he was like, when he met me, when he met my traumatized self afterwards, you know, he told me he was very happy that finally there is a part of me that got polluted by Egypt, and therefore now I'm really Egyptian. Like, you know, and you end up going there, right? You end up going there representing the Politburo of like the Free Egyptians Party, right? Like, you know, just to review what the hell is going on. And you never been to Suez. So you don't know, for example, a number of facts, which is number one, Suez is one of the poorest like governorates ever, despite having the Suez Canal in it, right? And because of it, there is a lot of dependency on the military. And at the same time, the fight there is between the Salafis and the Muslim Brotherhood. So the people who come to your party are either Christians or people who think that like Sawiris is handing out jobs and money, and that whoever Sawiris has sent, he in his luggage there is that money and there is those jobs. And you discover that basically the person who is running your campaigns there is actually being blackmailed by various peoples, and he's not really in control at all. Like, for example, you go during this, and he's supposed to have a car at your disposal, and he's supposed to have the people who are there to protect him. He bought protection in a car. The protectors took the car.
That's all in Suez, right?
Yeah, that's all. And so like this is just like your first hour. You know what I'm saying? Like you recognize that this is happening. You know, like, you know, you meet the people who are running the party and there. And for example, one of the guys, like the local people, right? You know, and like you get accused all the time that you are the party of the drug dealers and the prostitutes and whatever, because you're the secular ones, you know, the Islamic, whatever. But in Suez, it's actually true. Like, you know, I remember one of the members was there was called Fire. And Fire apparently was a tramadol dealer who tried to get us girls. Like, you know, and in reality, when you take a look at it ethically speaking, the reality is that those are the roots of the secular movement in Egypt. Like, if seculars exist in Egypt, then their actual roots, you know, is that, or the belly dancers and the drug dealers and organized crime. Those are your people. You know, and that's the thing, like, you know, you compare what they're wearing in 6 Degrees, and you compare the dancers wearing in 6 Degrees and what they're wearing in a Shabi wedding, and it's hoa, like, you know what I'm saying? It's just difference in money, right? So you go there and you recognize that, number one, that you are being robbed and that people are targeting you because you have the money. Number two, you're being targeted because, you know, both Muslim Brotherhood and like the Salafis have their, like, you know, spies on you, you know, and they all have other allies. So you start by going through discovering the reality of the situation. And your candidate is a Christian. You have a really good candidate. He's a Christian lawyer. And your entire job is trying to get him on top of the list to win. And in terms of votes, you have maybe guaranteed 40,000 Christian votes, right? Out of 200,000 votes. So that means that, like, there is a chance for one seat, but it might not be him. But like, in order, like, you have to ruin other people's like chances. And then they started like targeting us. So one of the guys putting like, you know, banners ended up getting killed, run over by a car. right? And that basically happened on a Thursday. And then, like, you know, you go and get people from abroad. You get the team from Alexandria, and I end up getting the best team. I end up even calling Rami Yaoub to come and join me. And he had just finished what's happening in Cairo. He was running like a campaign in Cairo. And suddenly we found ourselves in a situation which, like, you know, we had to like create a campaign and win, you know, against far more organized people who are dealing with like actual believers and stuff like that, right? So we managed to come up with the idea of, okay, maybe we can ruin their voting. And we instituted basically like a disinformation campaign, you know, that ended up, it was called Operation Double Heaven, and ended up working. It was called Operation Double Heaven because you basically, like, why would you have the Muslim Brotherhood or why would you vote for the Muslim Brotherhood or the Salafis when you can vote for both? Because you vote for them, you go to heaven, you vote for them, you go to heaven, but you vote for both at the same time, you guarantee your seat in heaven. And unify the voices of the Muslims against the evil secularists and the Satanists that are, you know, the sweetest people. And it worked. It really worked. It ended up like losing them 20,000 votes that day.
Because their votes were invalid.
Huh?
Because their votes were invalid?
Yeah. Because basically, like, we ended up creating, like, you know, this Islamic thing. Like, I ended up writing. And we sent it out, and people believed it because it seemed authoritative, right? And then they started publishing it themselves. And next thing you know, it was war everywhere. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, so they started going after our campaign that afternoon. So at 5 p.m., for example, like, you know, one of your people is being arrested by the military because he videotaped them, like, promoting Hizb al-Nur, right? So you try to get him. And we're trying to get him, like, you know, some guy from the affiliated Hizb al-Karama throws a Molotov cocktail at, like, your campaign headquarters. You know, so as you're dealing with this, you're still like, you know, you are, mind you, at the same time, you're back at the hotel. The hotel has judges living there, so you have the military protecting it. But because it ended up getting burned down to the ground, you have all those people that were there that decide that they're going to come to the hotel and attack us there. So next thing you know, you have people from your own party supposedly attacking you there for not protecting them while other people were in your party, while you're running an election. Right? And the military comes to you and they're like, you know, by the way, there is disruption outside and we're keeping them from attacking us. But if you don't get them out of here, we're going to shoot at everybody, you know? And suddenly, like, you know, the head of the Third Army is military calling you and he's like, you need to do something. And I don't like, you know, I'm down, like, to do something. You know, so like basically this is the part in which we like collected the people at 4 a.m, exited them from the hotel, right? Told everybody that we're basically like, you know, skipping out on the second day of the elections. And then we came back as ghosts and we ran the elections and then we went and like messed with them even more. And at the time, there was a problem because the way it worked is if you have an election, there are people you hire to go and stand in front of your ballot, count your boxes. So if you are dealing, for example, with the elections of, you know, Swiss, you have basically like, you need 150 people. So, and each one gets like 100 pounds a day, 150 pounds a day. Next thing you know, like, you know, the reason why there has been a Molotov cocktail thrown is because that day, about 300 people showed up, all claiming that they have worked for us and they were promised money and they're going to get paid now. And there was a lot of this. A lot of now, and like, we're gonna kill you, and you don't know what's going on. And Swiss and like, you know, we got out of Swiss being shot at. Like, you know, Rami ended up going in because the head of Al-Amn called him, pretending that they're gonna solve them, and just handed him over to the population. And like, we had to like we had an agreement and like a message to send it to me if there's an SOS. So we had to like run with the cars and like throw some money at them so they fight over the money while we grab them and put them in the car. They're shooting at us. And that was Suez. Like, you know, and we managed to steal a chair, like a seat there. You know, we managed to do this, right? And then after that, when, like, mind you, like that night where all this happened, that was the same night the Ahdas Majlis al-Wazara, the happened, where like, the protests happened for the prime ministers, whatever. And like, anytime there was anything that has happened, Suez would go and protest. Like Suez was super Saura. So like, what happened, there is a protest in Suez. I mean, I have a protest in Suez. The day of Majlis al-Wazara, Suez protested, other places protested, but the only place, Suez did not protest Majlis al-Wazara. Suez was protesting, but was protesting Masir al-Ahram. And like the news that was reaching to the Politburo in Egypt that like, the burning of the headquarters, the protest of like, and here is two people who are in the Politburo, like sitting, like everybody else did not leave Cairo. Everybody else was in the war room, letting other people handle shit. The fact that we were on the ground, just like, was insane. We did there was a lot of fun, but we came out of it fully understanding what the hell you're dealing with. And also fully understanding that basically you never want to go to Suez again. Because Suez very much like, reminded you, like it's very much that like Guy Ritchie films about London. Like this is what you get. It's basically a lot of working class people, right? Who have always had violence source of their lives, and the idea and poverty forces them to act in specific ways. Problematic, sure, for them, haram, but like I'm never being there again. But after that, I was being asked to go and monitor an election in Sinai. And in Sinai, you leave the era of British gangster films and you enter Italian mafia movies, right? Because you're dealing with families and different whatever, and they deal in different crimes, and like you become really good friends with the Don of the Capo de Capos. He gets killed 3 years later. I mourn him, like other friends mourn him. But at the time, he was super useful. Like anytime a car was stolen in Egypt, it was being sold in Gaza and like brought in during like, whatever. So like when we would call him and he'd be like, oh, that car, it just went into Gaza. So like, we can sell it in Gaza and give you the money. We cannot bring it. But there was this, suddenly you were being introduced to like, the two rulers of Egypt, right? And that is the thing that most people don't understand, is that, there are so-called like local leaderships, right? People who can actually move the street, people who actually affect things, and for all of their talk of the street and people in the street, most of the revolutionaries did not know the people. Not know, like they don't understand what does like, moving the street mean. For them, it means the street is protesting, we go stand in front and we tell them what to say. It is not working for the benefit of the people, understanding their issues, helping them out, and therefore gaining their loyalty and trust, and then being able to move them when needs be, right? Because they will come for you, they will come if they trust you. But if you're talking to them about esoteric things while they're facing real life problems and situations, why would they listen to you? If you make fun of them, if you're one of the millions of Egyptians living in Cairo who needs an butagaz in order to survive, like, what I'm saying, and you are making fun of like, the people who are being bought by an butagaz, like during the Ikhwan time, how out of touch are you? Right? Like, and this is the problem, right? You had a lot of people who claim to know what's best, and none of them truly understood the country or the ground they're working in. You're from Alexandria, right?
Yeah.
We had this discussion, like, what I'm saying, what do Alexandrians know about other people from other governorates?
Just the racist cliches we were talking about. Like, I don't think it's that it's that widespread.
Not that different, right?
Yeah, like you only know maybe a little about Cairo, but that's it.
And that's it. You don't know how people from Qanaa is like, but you know that they're problematic. You don't know
exactly
how Rafah is like, but you know that they're whatever. Right?
Yeah.
Like, nobody could tell why Gharbiya exists. You know what I'm saying? Like, nobody does. Like, it's and it's a problem. Like, people don't know their country. People don't know the difference between people from Minya and people from Asyut. Which is, they will kill you. For not knowing the difference. This is the law. most of them, like it was for me, like it was on the Cairo level. Cairo is a monster. Cairo is 26 million people. Like
Yeah.
it's 27 neighborhoods. We don't know most of them. Like I have counted, I have been to 15. Most people I know 6 or 7 or possibly 9, right? And this is our city. Most of those people live in the city for a long time. Yani, you live in Alexandria, you probably know every neighborhood in Alexandria, right?
Yeah.
Not the same in Cairo, because Cairo is a governorate as well as a city. You know, it should have cities.
Yeah, and
know?
even after having been in Cairo for like 3 years so far, ever since late 2019, I still
Right.
haven't, like, every
Probably
time I
went
go
to
to downtown
Maadi,
Cairo.
Zamalek, West Balad, مصر الجديدة, like.
Yeah, and there was one time I was going to Duqi, and I was coming from Alexandria, so I had to go through another. Yeah, so I went through Bulat, like by accident. I took a wrong exit. I literally spent like 90 minutes just lost in a place with no roads, nothing. Like I never knew that place, like even was below these bridges. So it made me think about it.
Now that's the thing, like.
It's there, but you pass by it every single fucking day, but you don't realize it.
There is about 105 locations in Cairo that serve alcohol.
Only
Yes. Where بقى are they? Like, you know what I'm saying?
downtown Cairo has like 70.
Maybe.
Maybe.
And maybe it has 30. Who knows? That's my point.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Count them.
you never know. Count them. You know, that's basically like, yeah, like, you know, it's too big. It's gotten too big. So how could you talk about like what's best for the country when you don't know the country?
Mm.
You know?
And you think that's the problem with the elites that were campaigning to
I
run
think
for?
Egypt definitely has an elite problem.
Mm.
Right? The elite
Yeah, but do you think that remains to be the problem, given that the junta, if you want to call it that, is running the show?
No.
They're not
The problem
necessarily
now
part of that.
is like, okay. So the problem is that in that regard, for example, the junta, they're running the show, for example, like the elites did not understand what they're signing up for. And for them, it was a compromise. And for them, like, you know, it was a lot of cheating of reality. Yani, and that is the problem, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't have lots of knowledge that gets transferred.
Against what?
That gets transferred.
Oh.
People don't know their history,
Mm.
right? People don't. They would like to, but they don't, right? You don't get told the real history about anything. So how are you supposed to actually like know where you're going if you don't know where you came from? Yani, why did 1919 revolution happen? Ya Abdullah, do you know?
Revolting against colonialism and to
Why?
have a delegation in the
Yeah, but why?
Paris Peace Conference.
What caused it? So what happened right before that? World War I,
Yeah.
14 to 18.
Yeah.
During World War I, the British.
Ottoman Empire was.
No, the British kidnapped 1.5 million Egyptians.
Kidnapped what?
Kidnapped about 1.5 million Egyptians.
Yeah, I'm actually reading that book right now. The Egyptian corpse. Yeah.
Right, and they threw them on the front lines, right? You know, as a support, logistical, whatever. And at a time in which like Egypt was like 8 or 10 million. So that was 20% population at least.
Yeah.
You know, best estimate. That's the reason why people were like enough. Right, you know, and then you have like a few years later, like a few years ago, the military announcing, you know, a celebration day for their participation in World War I, in which they never did. And any participation Egypt had in World War I happened under colonialism, and it was horrible. You know, and we don't.
The book that's being referred to, it's by Kyle J. Anderson, and it's called the Egyptian Labor Corps. I'll put a link in the description.
And I'll be having him on the podcast like 3 weeks from now.
Cool. No, that's gonna be. I should also talk to Alia Musallam about this. So Alia Musallam, a lot of her oral history work was on discovering this through like histories and stories and songs of resistance from that time, oral history stuff. But it's like whenever you talk to the historians, like this is the problem. Like, you know, like for example, a lot of times Sadat gets blamed for Islamizing the state.
Yeah.
Right? You know who was the first person to Islamize the state?
Oh.
The British. 1904. They were just came out of Sudan from being fought by the Mahdi, who was casting them as Christian invaders. And they were very offended on the idea that they're Christian invaders. Because number one, they followed the Church of England, and that's not really Christianity. But most importantly, they were consultants there to make money. They don't really care about us converting, you know. So in order to showcase that they are not really there, they instituted the first Islamic national holiday of Mawlid al-Nabawi. That was the British. The reason why we have Mawlid off is because of the British colonialism. And the start, you know. And stuff like that, like, you know, one was for declared Prince of Egypt, so King of Egypt, and so on. Abdullah?
I didn't hear that part. What were you saying?
No, I said one was Farouk chosen as the King of Egypt and Sudan.
I'm not sure.
1951. He was removed in 1952. He was the King of Egypt and Sudan for 1 year, and we have been holding it against the Sudanese. Since then, like we were one country with Syria more than we were one country with Sudan, and yet.
It's so disturbing. I thought it was longer.
Yeah, but it's that, like, you know, it's like when my father discovered in the Kilmet Nik is actually like a word from the days of the Prophet. And that it exists in a hadith, in which one of the hadiths, the Prophet asked, like, was just I guess, like, an
yeah.
Yes, no, not followers. Prophet, and like my head was like, I thought it was like new. I thought it was like from like the 20s, 1920s. No, it is existing in our heritage for the longest time. Why do we have toppler? Right.
Go ahead.
No. Okay, go. I don't care.
I was gonna say on that note, do you have any book recommendations on modern Egyptian history? And particularly ones that address like more contemporary.
So there is this book called تاريخ العبودية عند المصريين. And it's not really a book, it's PDF, because it was a book created by this, like, you know, it's this urban legend. It's about this guy who used to work as an office boy, you know, couldn't even write, and like somewhere in Bumfuck, like Delta, and like a bunch of leftists, like, you know, joined them, and they told him how to read and write, and then he started reading their books, and then he became somehow like one of the best researchers there is. And he wrote this book, and that book is like banned. But I know, for example, that this book exists like as part of the security apparatus narrative when it comes to understanding Egyptians, right? And the way, like, you know, the way it paints things, the way it divides people, the way it connects things, like Abdul Nasser Nakhmatun, the way it, like, you know what I'm saying, like, it's an interesting book to read. I would recommend that.
And do you have any more contemporary recommendations?
No, this is in 20th century, like.
No, I mean something very recent that you've read.
But something very recent, nothing that I can think of, but like if I think of something, I'll let you know, to be honest. But like there hasn't been a lot that was this phase that actually like bothered they're questioning the narrative, to be honest. Like, for example, that period, like, you know, had so many areas of interest that were not covered. The easiest of which is like when we're talking about influence operations, like how all of the things that were used basically by like in influence campaigns during, you know, Brexit or during Trump were actually tactics used in Egypt and originated in Egypt in 2011, 2012, 2013. You know, they only dealt with cyber troopers like after Trump won. And after Brexit, they started thinking maybe there is a problem. We've had them for years before that. You know, we have best practice, we have everything. So I don't know. We're pioneers when it comes to certain things, but nobody has like I don't think that many people have done interesting work recently, to be honest. But I will definitely when it comes to historians though. Hold on.
Okay.
So remember when we were talking about how I was working on a podcast for history.
Yeah.
And then when historian friends end up getting arrested and questioned, that's when I stopped doing everything. But yes, so let's see. First of all, there is the new book by Shab Fakhri and Yahya Shawkat, actually, which details the history of how the state started selling services to the Egyptians, right? So Shab's thing is the waterways, Magadi, basically, and how they came to be. And it's a hilarious story. But it's also measures like the first time how they financed it, how the British financed it by basically selling us access to water. And it was the first time they started like measuring and selling such utilities in Egypt. So that's Shihab, for example, I would say. Definitely talk to Shahid on regarding the history of the city. Also, Max Rodenbach, if you have not read Carrot City Victorious, did you not read it?
I haven't read it, but I spoke with him. Like we corresponded via email a couple of months ago.
Read it. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's really good. It will like give you all kinds of information that's just psychotic. You know, specifically, my favorite is the second famine when people started eating other people. And then Egyptians were horrified that people were eating people. And then they started being okay with people eating people. And then they started having opinions about which human meat tastes the best.
What?
And this happened.
Which human meat tastes the best?
I probably like I don't know, like do you think they ate babies or they just ate adults? Like that depends on your perspective. I have no idea. But yeah, like you know, like Hussein Omar, for example, you know, a lot of work. Like he is the grandson of what's his name, Saad Zaghloul, and he works a lot on Egyptian sectarianism, the history how it got created. Right, I think Matt Ellis and Jennifer Durr are always good to read and controversial. Don't do things with them. Who else?
Do you keep a log of books you've read or books you're looking forward to read, like on Goodreads?
No, because books have become really hard for me to read because of ADDness.
Because of what?
The ADD situation. So like I read them as PDFs on my Kindle, like you know what I'm saying, but like books, la.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Right. Well, you know, if I can think of something, I'll send it to you, and I am.
Okay, and I'll make sure to put.
Well, I gave you one already. I told you about Power, Faith, and Fantasy. So like you know, get on that, and like both of them, that and Carrot City Victorious, so much content. So like honestly, like you know, Egyptian military got modeled after the Confederate armies, huh? Like they were trained by Confederate soldiers. American Confederate soldiers who lost the war against the North, they became consultants and they established the Egyptian military based on the model of the Confederate army, for example.
That was in Max Rodenbach's book?
No, that's in the Max is more the history of Cairo. Right? No, that's in Michael Orr's book, for example. You read Khalid Fahmi's book. Did you read the one about Al-Asr Al-Aini?
No, the most recent one?
It's not the most recent one, like, but it's one of the ones he wrote. It becomes interesting because one of the things he uncovers basically is that that until the late 1800s, right? This like that they did a huge male circumcision campaign in which they circumcised 90% of the population that were not uncircumcised before because of what's it called, marad gildi, like some sort of skin disease. So in reality, 90% of the population, despite all the Islamic structure, was not circumcised. until they had to.
Mm.
And they had to do a campaign to do it in order to save their lives. And somehow, like, it's kind of like the dog thing. عارف انت يعني كلام نكسة. Like, it's so like, you know, we circumcise now claiming it's some religious thing. While in reality, it was just like we were not doing it. And الرمل دخل بقى في النص فاضطرينا نشيل الحتة. You know, like, it's stuff like that is truly like interesting and horrifying. So that's what I would read. Did you read Aaron's book?
They read what?
Aaron's book.
Yeah, marketing. Yeah, I did. Yeah. And actually cited it.
I cited it in a paper.
Nice.
Well, I thought like I didn't find something like that wasn't surprising really, especially when it came to the part where she was attending a conference towards the end of 2012, and they were making, when someone asked for who got the funding, something like that, they said they couldn't like make it public like during the event. Meanwhile, it was already online since it was a US entity thing, so that was really like, I think anyone would expect that. And yeah, I think it's a great book, but I also think it's very academic, like it's very hard and it's very dry. It's not that.
Yeah, I know.
Like,
Nice PhD.
what did you think? What did you think of
funny.
it?
No,
I
I didn't.
saw your name. Your name was there towards the end in the
No way.
acknowledgement. Yeah. What did you think of it?
I didn't finish reading it. I was asking you if you finished reading it. I'm still waiting for my signed copy. I'm not buying it. Like, they owe me. Yeah, because Sina ended up being a situation which, like, for example, the way they did the thing, it was not all in the hands of the locals. There was store which was filled with as many, like 5 times as many as Bedouins in Sinai. And that was all Muslim Brotherhood like implants. So suddenly you're dealing with a situation which, because the locals, the Bedouins, lost in all of their elections, they institute like, you know, blocks and wars, and they start shooting at the government.
That's in Sinai.
All right, it's in Sinai, like, you know, and your team, like, you recognize it's happening. You're not running the campaigns, huh? So like, you have other people running the campaign, and like the person who was running that campaign like got on a plane and left the team to return with a bus. So as the bus is going through the road to try to get back to Egypt, that's when the shooting starts happening. So they start like, you know, so the driver like leaves the bus and runs and leaves like the team. So the team calls me in Cairo, like, you know, crying. They need someone to come and save them because they're in the middle of like crossfire between the Bedouins and the military. And on the other hand, you get a call from the military asking you to like, you know, basically to demand a re-election, because that's the only way to de-escalate the situation, right? You know, so you have priorities of, okay, getting your people out to safety. So you end up like calling the Bedouins, and the Bedouins contact, I don't know how, and then they go and take them from the desert. They take them all the way into the desert, hide them in a house while the fighting is happening. You know, and then you make the official declaration that you want a recount. So like, they stopped burning the, you know, the court, because that was happening. They burned the court. They burned the courthouse. They shot at the military all over the, like, whatever. Like, it was insane. And mind you, even like, you know, the ability to like, you know, monitor the elections there, you have a lot of spaces, right? I need to move the boxes, and you don't have control of the land. You don't have security, right? And and at the same time, the Israelis won't allow you to fly airplanes over Sinai to carry the boxes, the voting boxes. So like, you know, it was a situation which like, how do you protect the you know, how do you, would you dare run after the truck that has the box, make sure that nobody changes them, risking getting like bazookaed out, like I'm saying in Sinai at the moment, like. And that was that. Like, it was really funny, because that day I remember, like, I got a call from Muhammad Lahmar in Nueva. He was like a friend. He was like one of the people who would tweet, whatever. He's like, Mahmoud, where are you? Welcome to Tahrir Square in Nueva. And then you hear in the back, you know, machine guns. Come shoot with us. Come. like, you know, you go to like a campaign event and it's in Firan, Wadi Firan, at a time in which like a whole bunch of Bedouins are doing like a sit in there, and all of their like, you know, demands are attached with threats. Like, you know, today we are attempting in Tehran and tomorrow we'll turn Cairo into Tehran, like stuff like that. So you're going to this political event and everybody's sitting on the floor in the middle of the desert, in this wadi between those whatever. Everybody's sitting there, Bedouin sitting there with their guns, and you can smell weed everywhere. Right? You can smell the fucking weed everywhere. And you're like, okay. I'm supposed to give a speech. I got killer, like, you know, it was an interesting time in terms of like finding out what kind of country you lived in. And I have seen very little. But I can tell you that Egypt is a planet.
Mm.
You know, it has many, many aliens. And somehow they all live here, you know. That was basically like, you know, after Suez, you thought it could not get worse. And then apparently burning the courthouse and shooting at the military, you know, and like, you know, and that was Egypt. And that has always been Egypt in a weird way. It never existed. You know, those kind of clashes, all of those things are not new. They always happened in every election. They stopped happening, but they always did, because that's the nature of the country. The country has a lot of violence and a lot of repression. There is a pyramid structure in every area, and there can only be one pharaoh. You know, and that's the problem that they have with people in power, is that they all need that one leader. They all need this person on top to define their relationship with them. You know, and without that relationship, if they're not on his side, then they have lost. It's a nation of former slaves. So in their brains, you can either be a slave or a master. And if you're not a master, you're a slave. So if you are a master, you don't join a revolution. You don't upset the status quo. Because there'll never be equality. There'll only be masters and slaves. So who do you want to be? You know? صوت على النبي. You know,
very
and if you want to be a master in Egypt, right? Or the status quo, you know. And that's the, like, you know what I'm saying? Like that I understand, because that is in the DNA. It's not a city, it's not a place of justice. Like, have you ever watched Dark Knight?
Dark Knight.
Oh.
Yeah, I did.
Remember that Joker thing in which the two ships, and each one has the remote control to blow the other one up? You know, the true face of people in Gotham, okay, you can either like blow the other people up, or they can blow you up, and you have to choose which one you're gonna do first. Remember that thing? Had the Joker done this in Egypt, what would have happened? Honestly.
I don't really remember that part of the movie.
Well, basically, I wanted to showcase how people are like, you know, animals. So he gave a cruise and a ship that carries prisoners. Each one of them, they got a remote controlled detonator that can detonate the other ship, who have the possibility to detonate their ship. So you had to choose between trusting them or detonating them first.
Well, I think it's there isn't much choice. They would detonate.
You know, in the film, they were like, no, humanity, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to make the choice. And Egypt be like, press. So yeah, I don't intend to depress you. I'm not trying to depress you by this, but like, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah.
You know, it's what you learn. There is a third that is really good, and a third that's really shit, and a third that just goes with the flow. And that's the problem. That the one that goes with the flow most of the time operates out of fear. And it's a lot easier to go with those who are truly shit than those who are truly good. So we leave.
So what?
So we leave.
Yeah.
Yeah. You break it, you own it, you know. I didn't break anything, alhamdulillah. I went to bring down a Ministry of Interior, and Hosni Mubarak fell.
And the whole world order was fucked.
لا but like I did not tell him to quit. He quit. I did not force him out, you know. I did not vote for Eden Morsi Shafiq. I did not vote for Sisi. The best you can accuse me with is the slide from 5 جنيه وربع to 7 جنيه against $1. And some graffiti. And quite possibly karaoke. Okay? Like, those are the 3 things that you could possibly blame me with. Everything else is on the new guy. ماليش فيه. There is no, مش بيقول لك there is no power without responsibility. حال, if you have no power, you have no responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility, while with no power comes zero. Responsibility.
I don't know how I feel about that.
I think that's a good way to end.
You don't know how to feel about it, but you feel it's a good way to end it. ماشي.
No,
ماشي يا
no.
خالد.
I can I can share some of my opinion regarding this.
Afterwards, you're like, I'll share it afterwards, after your.
No, I can share it now before we end.
إيه قول لي.
Well, I don't want it to sound like a cliche, but I think everyone has a responsibility to at least attempt to try to fix the situation, especially if you're in Egypt. And I think one of the reasons I started this podcast, I'm actually in Cairo, and I don't intend on changing that anytime soon. And part of why I think it's a risk worth taking is, no one's doing it, and I think it's worth it to have these conversations, even though it's not in Arabic, which actually was the main intention. Like I thought I would do the whole thing in Arabic. I mean, unless the guest doesn't speak Arabic, of course. But then I thought that would be kind of the safer option, given it's not the atmosphere is quite tense.
See, I would be more worried about doing it in English than Arabic, to be honest.
What?
I would be more worried about doing it in English than Arabic, to be honest. But that's just me.
That's.
I don't know how to feel about that either. Yeah, but anyway, I decided last week that all episodes would be translated to Arabic. Like I would make subtitles, and and also I think it's really quite worrying that it's not something revolutionary. I'm just having conversations with academics, with people like you that we're speaking about stuff that
happened almost a decade.
Was talking about the economy.
What?
Ayman Hadhoud was talking about the economy. Okay, there are no rules. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying something. There is no monster to negotiate with.
Well, I'm not saying what I'm doing is safe either, but
No. I'm not saying it's safe, and I'm not trying to dissuade you. What I'm saying is it's kind of like the idea that people are gonna be able to negotiate with God on Judgment Day regarding how much they drank and how many people they had sex with. This is the idea that if there was someone in the CC government in which you could go to and ask for the new rules of engagement.
There is no rules of engagement.
There are no rules to stand next. There is a حيطة. There isn't a single حيطة. Like it's just completely random. You're safe until you're not.
Exactly.
Okay?
And so far I'm kind of safe. So let's
so
let's
far
keep
you're
it
safe,
that
and
way.
so far you're good. Alhamdulillah, Rab. And I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just saying. No. I respect it because it's a way of life. It's something I have done for 10 years. And the only way to keep doing it is to believe that you are safe until you're not.
Well, I think one of the ways in which I am dealing with it is I don't acknowledge it. Like when you asked me how
that's the idea of safe.
Yeah, like what guests
have you had? Like what are some of the guests you've had? I had to open it because I don't keep it in my mind. Like I just record it, upload it, and like I don't know about it. Like even my parents don't know about it. So that's a kind of a way of.
لا أنا بشجعك.
resisting.
This is like, why not? What's the worst that could happen? You know, and in reality, like, you know, there's death. Like there is a certain death that happens if you don't do anything about this kind of thing. You know, like you can either express your ideas and follow them, or you can be afraid of the consequences of doing so, living under like crazy, like, you know, or like stupid violent people. But if every single time we're not going to do something because of crazy violent people, we're not going to do anything.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abdullah, for having me. Thank you. Have a lovely day.
You likewise.